Welcome back, guys. Gonna do, I think, the last part of the 700 swap kind of overview. I want to talk about the fuel system and the wiring. So first, with the fuel system, I used the factory 22 Yamaha R7 pump, and I used the factory wiring, just extended it. And I chose to go with an external fuel tank. I know that the nitrous sticker throws a lot of people off, but this is actually a fuel tank, being that I'm not running, at least right now, a fuel tank in the stock location. So yes, it's small. No, this is not the final rendition of this. This was a proof of concept, and let me tell you right now, it works. It doesn't hold a lot of fuel, but it works. So all this is a fire extinguisher that I cut the bottom out of, and I mounted the factory R7 fuel hat into. Now, if you had the actual R7 tank or the MT07 tank, that works out a lot better. It makes your life a little bit easier because then you can just cut the factory mount out of the fuel tank, and then you could just weld it in place there. I didn't have that. I only got the fuel pump. So I actually used 3/16 steel, which is pretty thick, and I hole sawed a hole out that the stock pump could fit up into, and then to where I could extend out my own bolts to mount the fuel pump to, and that's just the factory plate that holds in the fuel pump. Right now, I've just got the fuel line hose clamped on. That is not permanent. This, again, is not the final rendition of this. This is the proof of concept, and it works. So when you use the stock fuel hat and fuel pump, that takes out a lot of the question of trying to figure out pressure or what kind of pump you should go. If you go with an external one, can you go with an in-tank pump, and then the lines? This just takes out a lot of the guesswork. When I do have this all set up, when I get my swing arm in, I have a larger fire extinguisher. Actually, I'll just grab it. So I actually have, I think this is a 1.5 gallon tank. So that's what I'm hoping to switch to, that fire extinguisher. And then I have the stock R7 fuel line that I'm going to utilize the stock nipple or push lock fitting, if you would. So the fuel pump will actually mount in there sideways. The outlet will be this way. I'll use this and then just have a line going to my fuel rail. But yeah, on this is all, it's just a fire extinguisher, guys. All I did was take off that other one, cut out the bottom, and then I did use a tank sealer because I did weld to this and it kind of burnt off some of the paint. I wanted to make sure it was sealed. So I used some Pour 15 metal prep and then a tank sealer, let that cure for four or 5 days. So with welding on something like this, what I've learned, or with anything that needs to hold either water or pressure, that the smallest pinhole can be like the bane of everything you're trying to do. It can be a huge pain in the butt. So just doing the tank sealer, not really even worrying about putting fuel in it, see if it leaks. Just go ahead and do the tank sealer, and then don't worry about it. So on this one too, this is the fill. All it is just, it's still the fire extinguisher top, so it's still got the gauge on it and everything. All I did was I capped the top hole, and then on this one I put in my own, I believe this is a 1/4 inch MPT to a 1/8 barb fitting, and I just used some gas tank sealer like the putty, and I just made it so that there's a tiny pinhole, and this is my vent line, and that just goes up and tucks up underneath the bodywork. So that's the fuel system on this. This was it wasn't my idea. I did actually get this from the guy, the street sweeper. He's doing like the L4 cylinder? I don't know, some crazy big 1200cc Ducati engine. He's got a 22 plus Grom, and he's doing Ducati. a Ducati engine in, and he actually mentioned that he was going to build a tank, and then that got my imagination going, and I'm like, oh, well, why don't I just make a nitrous tank, and then it'll gain attention, and it'll be my fuel cell. So again, after I get the swing arm in and I get moving on that tank, I'm going to try to weld up the factory gas tank with the factory fill port. I'm not sure how big it's going to be. Actually, here we can just look at it. It's fine. So that's basically how much of it I had to cut out. So that would be where the factory bottom is, and I cut a good 2.5, 3 inches out of it. So I don't even know if this would hold a 1/2 gallon, but my plan was just to, make a flat bottom, maybe raise it up in the back to get a little bit more volume in there. And then I've got 1/2 inch fuel line or fuel hose. Just gonna have a drain here, potentially a drain on the other side that drains into the external tank. And I think when I get done with that, it'll look super clean because I'll hide the fuel lines in the frame, and it'll just pop out right at the shock and go straight in. So that's the fuel system, or at least my plan for it. The external tank thing, I think that's the easiest way to get around the whole tank thing, because even when I do weld that up, it's not going to look pretty. If I was TIG welding it, it might look a little bit better, maybe not me doing it, but at least then you could control some of the heat as you're kind of welding the bottom to it. But I'm just going to MIG weld it. It's not going to look pretty. It's going to be one of those functions over form things. And then I'll just use the Pour 15 metal prep and tank sealer, and I'll seal it up. And then I'll have my factory fill port and the external tank. And the last thing I want to go over is the wiring on this thing. So some people decide to cut out what they don't need on the wiring harness. Some people shorten and lengthen their harnesses to kind of lay a little bit better, be more tucked away. For me, I didn't want to mess with the factory harness at all, at least not until I knew it functioned and ran and everything worked properly. So there's a couple videos of this in the early stages where the wiring's literally just hanging off the thing. It looks like an absolute rat nest. And that was just testing. Now I'm in kind of like, if I were gonna mess with it, I'm kind of in the secondary testing stages where I'm like, am I gonna have any issues with this, that, or whatever? And then if I was gonna mess with it now, I'd obviously shorten it and make it not so I don't know, proud, not so high. Just make it fit a lot cleaner. But I think with my wiring skills and my patience, I am just going to leave it the way it is, because from Yamaha, this is already tested. It's already weatherproofed. I used all the stock connectors. So I know I'm not going to have an issue with it in the future if I don't mess with it. If I do mess with it, I can almost guarantee I'm going to have an issue. So stock wiring harness, didn't mess with anything. Kept all the stock connectors. I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but the only thing I really did was I extended the fuel pump wires for the sending unit and the power and ground. I extended those. That's the only thing I did. One more thing I did. I added the taillight wiring because that did not come with this. But as far as the factory headlight, everything else, the dash, all Yamaha R7 wiring. So I think that's it. I think this is going to wrap up at least talking about kind of how it got here, how we got here. I'll probably make another one of the outside, maybe when I've got it half put together, to show you guys a little bit of how things fit and a little of the troubles that I had with the factory bodywork. And man, these Groms are so simple. It took 10 minutes to take all this junk off. Probably could have done it quicker if I would have left the gas tank on, but I'm telling you guys, these are cheap. They are fun. They're easy to work on. And they're super fun to put a stupid amount of horsepower in. All right, y'all take it easy.